Here's a question that sounds simple, but almost nobody can actually answer. What's the most valuable thing you need to build a data center in 2026? Your first guess is probably land, maybe chips, maybe money. You'd be wrong on all three. The single rarest, most fought-over asset in this entire industry right now isn't land, and it isn't even the GPUs everyone's obsessed with. It's electricity, reliable, massive, high-capacity electricity, and the ability to connect to it fast before someone else does. Companies with more money than most countries are quietly racing each other for access to power grids like it's the most valuable resource on Earth. In a way, right now, it is. Today we're breaking down the real economics of owning a data center, because this is the physical bottleneck sitting underneath the entire AI boom, and almost nobody outside the industry understands how strange this business actually is. Let's start with what actually makes a modern data center valuable, because it's not one thing, it's a bundle of 5 scarce inputs that all have to come together at once. Land, grid access, cooling, water, or an alternative, fiber connectivity. And GPUs or other accelerator chips. Miss any single one of these 5, and the other 4 don't matter. You can have the cheapest land on Earth, but if you can't get power to it or water to cool it, it's worthless for this purpose. This is why modern AI-focused data center projects are increasingly paired directly with high-voltage power connections from day one. The power negotiation isn't an afterthought anymore. It's the foundation the entire project is built around. And the scale of investment reflects it. US data center construction spending has roughly tripled over just the past 3 years, while global data center power demand is forecast to rise sharply by 2030. You're not really building a building. You're assembling 5 simultaneously scarce resources, and the entire value of the project depends on how well you've secured all 5. Here's a shift that completely changes how you should think about this industry. Capacity in modern data centers is now measured and sold in megawatts, not square footage. Developers who, not long ago, were planning facilities under 5 megawatts are now routinely planning for hundreds of megawatts, with some projects targeting full gigawatt scale. Think about the scale jump that represents. That's not a bigger building, that's an entirely different category of infrastructure project, closer to a power plant than a warehouse. This single shift means the capital stack and the utility negotiation now matter more than classic commercial real estate valuation ever did. You're not really in the real estate business anymore once you're operating at this scale. You're in the power brokering business, and the building is almost secondary to the electricity contract underneath it. Here's where most people's mental model of this business breaks down completely. The obvious costs are what you'd expect: construction, chips, operating staff. Those are real, but they're not what actually determines whether a project succeeds. The hidden costs are grid upgrades, backup generation, cooling systems, and this is the one that surprises people most: long lead times for transformers and switchgear. In practice, many data center projects aren't delayed by construction work at all. They're delayed by interconnection queues and power delivery constraints, literally waiting in line for the electrical grid to have room for you. Imagine spending years and hundreds of millions of dollars building a facility, only to discover the actual bottleneck was never the concrete or the chips. It was waiting for a slot on the power grid, and there was nothing money alone could do to skip that line any faster. Here's a distinction that trips up a lot of people evaluating this industry from the outside. A data center can look enormously asset-heavy: steel, concrete, chips, cooling systems, and still be genuinely fragile as a cash flow business. If power is expensive, or if the facility is underutilized, that mountain of physical infrastructure doesn't protect you at all. The building being worth a fortune on paper means nothing if the electricity to run it costs more than you can charge customers, or if half the capacity sits empty. And here's a wrinkle specific to AI-focused facilities that doesn't apply the same way to older-style colocation data centers. Utilization, customer concentration, and contract structure matter enormously more, because a single large AI tenant can end up dominating both the revenue and the risk of an entire facility. If that one customer walks away or restructures their contract, the whole project's economics can shift overnight. Here's a resource most people never think about in the context of technology infrastructure: water. Hyperscale AI facilities often rely on water-intensive cooling systems in certain geographies, which has quietly turned water access into a genuinely strategic variable for where these facilities get built, not just an engineering detail. This is exactly why some operators are actively shifting toward regions with cooler natural climates, better power availability, or facility designs specifically engineered to reduce water dependence altogether. Think about how strange this is for a moment. Some of the most advanced computing infrastructure on the planet is being sited based partly on rainfall and regional water tables. The same considerations that would matter for a farm or a factory, not obviously for a facility full of silicon chips. Here's a shift in location economics that overturns decades of conventional data center site selection. Traditional U.S. hubs, Virginia, Oregon, Texas, Ohio, still matter enormously, and for good historical reason. But increasingly, the bigger question driving where a project actually gets built isn't proximity to end users or existing infrastructure. It's simply, where can a project secure permits, land, and electricity the fastest? Speed to power can now beat proximity to population centers. A location slightly less convenient for latency, but dramatically faster to secure a power connection, can win out over a better location stuck in a multi-year interconnection queue. In an industry racing to build AI compute capacity as fast as possible, the site that lets you turn the lights on 18 months sooner can be worth more than the site that would otherwise seem obviously superior. Here's where this stops being purely a business story and becomes exactly the kind of story this channel exists to break down. Control over compute infrastructure is becoming a genuine geopolitical issue because whoever controls the data centers, the chips inside them, and the power feeding them can shape who has access to advanced AI capability at all. This is precisely why countries are increasingly emphasizing what's being called compute sovereignty, and why large-scale data center buildouts are now treated as strategic national infrastructure, not simply private sector investment decisions. This creates a genuinely new kind of bargaining dynamic between governments and operators. Governments want the jobs, the tax base, and the strategic autonomy that comes with hosting this infrastructure domestically. Operators want cheap power, relaxed permitting, and stable, predictable regulation. The result is that data centers have become a strange cross between a utility asset, an industrial megaproject, and a national security object, all inside the same building. Let's put some real scale behind everything we've covered so far, because the projected growth in this industry is genuinely staggering. AI-linked data center power demand is expected to grow far faster than traditional cloud computing workloads ever did, with one projection estimating global data center power demand could rise 165% by 2030 compared to 2023 levels. That's not incremental growth. That's an industry more than doubling its total power appetite in under a decade. One scenario projects data center demand reaching around 92 gigawatts by 2027, with AI representing a rapidly rising share of that total. To put that in perspective, that's an amount of electricity demand comparable to powering entire small countries, concentrated specifically in facilities full of chips crunching AI workloads. Here's a genuinely counterintuitive twist. The industry actually is getting more efficient, and it's still losing the race against raw demand growth. Average power usage effectiveness, a standard measure of data center efficiency, is expected to improve meaningfully by 2030. Facilities are getting better at converting electricity into useful computing work, with less wasted as heat and overhead. But here's the catch. Those efficiency gains are being completely overwhelmed by how fast AI-driven demand for computing capacity is growing. It's a bit like making cars dramatically more fuel efficient, while the number of cars on the road triples at the same time. The efficiency improvement is real. It's just not remotely enough to offset the sheer scale of new demand arriving on top of it. Here's a detail that connects data centers directly back to traditional energy markets in a way most people don't expect. In the short term, Natural gas is carrying much of the incremental power load in some US markets. Why gas specifically? Because it can be deployed faster than building new large-scale generation capacity of other kinds. When you need power now, and the alternative is waiting years for new transmission infrastructure or a new power plant of a different type, natural gas becomes the pragmatic bridge, even for companies publicly committed to clean energy goals. This is a quiet but important thread tying data centers directly into broader energy and commodity markets. The AI boom isn't just a story about chips and software. It's increasingly a story about natural gas contracts, transformer lead times, and grid capacity playing out behind the scenes of every new AI product announcement. Here's a strategic pattern reshaping how this entire industry operates. Increasingly, the economics are shaped by whether a project can lock in power before competitors do, which is exactly why some operators build first and figure out monetization later. This flips the usual order of business logic. Normally, you'd secure customers and contracts, then build capacity to match. In this industry, some operators are doing the opposite, racing to physically secure land, permits, and power connections as fast as possible, treating the actual facility almost like a claim being staked, with the assumption that AI compute demand will be there to fill it once it's built. It's a high-stakes bet. Build the infrastructure fast enough to have it ready when demand arrives, even before you've locked in exactly who's paying for it. Get the timing right, and you own one of the scarcest assets in the industry. Get it wrong, and you've built an extremely expensive, extremely specific piece of infrastructure with nobody ready to use it yet. So if you're evaluating whether to actually own one of these facilities, here's the question that matters far more than anything else. Can you secure power at a price and timeline that still leaves a spread after capital costs, cooling, and financing are all accounted for? That spread, the gap between what power and infrastructure cost you and what you can charge for the compute capacity sitting on top of it, is what determines whether your data center behaves like a durable infrastructure monopoly, generating reliable returns for decades, or an expensive stranded box, sitting there fully built with nobody able to profitably use it. The building doesn't decide which of those two outcomes you get. The power contract does. Everything else, the chips, the cooling, the fiber, even the land itself, is downstream of whether you actually won the fight for electricity at the right price on the right timeline. So let's go back to where we started. Not land, not chips, power. The single scarcest ingredient in the entire AI boom isn't the technology everyone talks about. It's the electricity required to run it, the grid capacity to deliver that electricity, and the speed at which a company can lock both down before its competitors do. Water, geopolitics, gas pipelines, transformer lead times, all of it flows from that one central bottleneck. This is exactly the kind of industry this channel exists to take apart, something that looks like a simple technology story on the surface, and turns out to be a story about energy markets, national infrastructure, and global competition for a resource most of us never think twice about using every single day. If this changed how you think about the next AI headline you read, subscribe, because we're just getting started pulling apart the businesses hiding behind the headlines. See you in the next one.